YGO Strats single card discussion's gonna be talking about some of the cards that have impacted Yu-Gi-Oh! Throughout the years. Today's card, the quick play that in the right format could win the game by itself, Wavering Eyes. Wavering Eyes was first released in Cross Souls Advanced Edition in 2015 as a preview for its true debut set, Clash Rebellions, released in the same year. As of this video, it's received two other reprints, once in OTS Pack 7 in 2018, and most recently in Ancient Guardians in 2019. It was first hit on the ban list in April of 2016, going from unlimited straight to banned with no middle ground, and it did the same in reverse a little over a year later, going from banned right back to unlimited in September of 2017. Presumably it was deemed a non-issue with the new master rules for the pendulum mechanic. Since that time, it has stayed at 3 ever since. A quick play spell card, its effect reads: destroy as many cards in each player's pendulum zones as possible, then apply these effects in sequence depending on the number of cards destroyed by this effect. 1 or more, inflict 500 damage to your opponent. 2 or more, you can add 1 pendulum monster from your main deck to your hand. 3 or more, you can banish 1 card on the field, and 4 or more, you can add 1 Wavering Eyes from your deck to your hand. 4 effects on this card, both to match the 4 scales that it can pop, and as a subtle reference to the player who had it resolve against them, forfeiting the match. Wavering Eyes was released into the game at the same time as we approached the rise of Pepe, in the same set that gave us the first wave of the performance cards, the Clowns. Also released in that time was the Master of Pendulum structure deck, giving players access to the powerful new Pendulum Magician cards. This, coupled with the rise of good Performapal cards like Skull Crobat Joker or even Lizard Draw, meant Pendulum decks were becoming more and more popular in the meta, and thanks to the structure deck, making the core more cheap, even just in terms of local level of play. And that's what set the stage for Wavering Eyes to really shine. Everyone and their mother playing some variant of Pendulum Magicians, almost always with a performance engine, and boy did this card shine. Just resolving the effect for 2 was strong, able to add any pendulum monster from the deck to the hand, putting 2 scales in that didn't really matter to pop them, search a starter like Skull Crobat Joker and eventually Monkey Board, and you could unbrick a hand with that pretty much by itself. And since with Master Rule 3, pendulum monsters were free to be summoned back without any need for link arrows, that meant the 2 cards popped to get your search, or just fuel for synchro summons, or more often than not, Xyz summons. But in the Pendulum Mirror, this card went from a solid one to a broken one, offering players a non-targeting banish to remove any card on the field, giving you the means to either clear back row or any sort of problem monster, and for icing on the cake, searches out another copy of itself, meaning that if your opponent had scales and 1 monster, resolving your Wavering Eyes would get you 2 cards in your hand, remove 1 monster from their field, and on top of it all, clearing their scales. And once Wavering Eyes had resolved, it was incredibly difficult to come back from. Getting a second copy of the card meant that they could have it set on your turn to go off again, and if they waited for you to play more scales before activating it, that meant they could potentially go off for 4 again, at which point it was pretty much customary to enter the scoop phase. Especially when Dimensions of Chaos hit the game with not just Monkey Board, but Performage Plushfire, a card that when destroyed could summon any Performage from the deck. So not only could the player clear the scales, banish a card, get 2 searches, but also could potentially summon a monster from the deck. Or if God gave you 2 Plushfires and Wavering Eyes in your opening, you also got a free rank 4 Xyz. Wavering Eyes was such a powerhouse that I can remember my friends and I all playing Pendulum Mirror matches and just trying to find ways to either get to it or to counter it. I personally played Alchemic Magician in my deck if I went first to try and summon that out and then set it, and I also mained Denko Sekka in large part so it could be my normal so that I wouldn't have to live in fear of their set Wavering Eyes. The card also lent strength to the Performage engine in general, as Wavering Eyes' burn for 500 made it susceptible to be negated by Damage Juggler, which could lead to some long turns of multiple chains of Wavering Eyes with Juggler with a second Wavering Eyes and then a third Wavering Eyes and then a second Juggler. It was wild. It also gave play to Apocryphort Towers in the metagame, enabling Towers Turbo to rise in playability, much to the bane of EU players who were not allowed to play Diamond Crab King. After its banning in Pepe format, it would eventually come back, where once again it saw abuse, though this time through Astrograph Sorcerer. Able to destroy your scales to search out an Astrograph Sorcerer, Astrograph would then be able to trigger since the cards were destroyed, meaning you got a free body on board, as well as a search for a replacement for one of your scales. These days, it's fallen from grace, so to say, being more of a personal tech choice in Pendulum decks at best, as opposed to the mandatory 3 of. Modern Pendulum builds of Magician or even Endymion or Zephyra all have more native ways to search out their cards, and often not at the cost of the 3 for 1. That fact, coupled with the lack of 1 card full scales in the game compared to 2016, makes it less enticing to modern decks. That being said, if Pendulum ever does become a high-tier deck, you can bet this card will be at least in the side decks as a great blowout for the mirror. Overall, Wavering Eyes is a former staple of one of the most distinct and powerful formats in this game's history, and one that can't hurt to have on the off chance Konami ever decides to make another high-tier Pendulum deck, or at least one that's played well when not piloted by Triff. And so that's our look at Single Card Discussion's Wavering Eyes. Stay tuned for our next video, and feel free to suggest some cards to review or what type of video you'd like to see. Don't forget to like, and as always, subscribe to YGO Strats, so you too can become a true duelist.